I did not get confirmation from Kristen or Brian Wallace. They could be showing up, but they did not say that they weren't.
Okay.
Let me know when you'd like me to go over the rules.
Are we broadcasting yet?
We are. I just started.
Okay. Then I won't say no headlocks, no anything like that. Are we at 6 o'clock? I don't. My clock is turned off right now when you put your screen like that. So
We're at 5:30. Yes.
or I'm for 5:30. All right. Let's give it one more minute and then we'll get started. 5:31. Start reading your spiel.
You got it. Okay, this is the Plan Commission meeting, and we will begin with some instructions. For public attendees, attendees are automatically muted and can only be unmuted by the meeting host. A public comment section is included for any items, whether on the agenda or not. Comments are limited to 2 minutes per attendee. Raise hand if participating with Zoom. Those participating by phone can raise hand by pressing *9. Plan Commission members and presenters, you are all muted automatically. Please remain muted unless participating during an agenda item. When discussion occurs, the chairperson will call upon members to raise their hand to comment. All votes must be taken by roll call vote. Be sure to unmute during the voting process. And Chris, you can call the meeting to order.
Okay, I will call our Plan Commission meeting for September 14th, 2020 to order. Roll call, please.
Chris Zellner.
Here.
Phil Willems.
Here.
Kristen Runge. Brad Zeman.
Here.
Brian Malish.
Here.
Chris Thomas.
Here.
Brian Wallace.
Okay, we have a quorum to start our meeting. So first item we have is minutes. Would somebody like to make a motion on that? Please raise your hand and then state it.
Make a motion to approve.
Okay, motion by Chris Thomas. Do we have a second? Second by Brad Zeman. Any other comments about this? Raise your hand. Seeing none, roll call vote, please.
Chris Zellner.
Yes.
Phil Willems. Phil Willems. Phil's freezing up.
Yes.
Perfect. Brad Zeman.
Yes.
Brian Malish.
Yes.
Chris Thomas.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Okay, next item we have is public comment. Is there anyone here who would like to make any comments on tonight's agenda or any other items?
I have a hand raised. Looks like Mike Lawton would like to speak.
Pull Mike in, let him go.
Okay, you're good to go, Mike.
Oh, unmute. There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right. Yeah, this little disorganized, I guess, because we have to comment before we hear the presentations. But anyway, on the CSM for the Kramer development, I had a number of comments on their driveway easement that I had submitted back in, let me look at the date on it. I think it was like May or April. May 4th. Anyway, that was then right after that, they pulled it because of the COVID thing, which I appreciate. And then I saw it pop up on the agenda again for this meeting. I never heard back from anybody. I did forward it to, at Brian's suggestion, I forwarded it to Deanne O'Callahan. So I haven't heard from the village or Deanne O'Callahan. So we would like our issues with the access easement that are listed in my email resolved to protect the our rights to our two houses there, because I assume you don't want us to enter and exit from Q indefinitely. You'd like to move the access to the other side. So my comments are too lengthy to cover in the 2 minutes, so I won't even dare to go into those. So that's my comment on that issue. Also, I assume the thing about the 75-25, 70-30 business, that's a public hearing item, so we can comment if we wish later on that.
Yes, that's correct, Mike.
Okay, all right. That's all I have to say for the moment, unless there are questions about the CSM.
Okay, we'll come to that at that time, and hopefully we'll address what you're referring to, Mike. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, any others? Please raise your hand.
I see no hands raised.
Seeing no hands, let's move on then. So our first item under new business, discussion action on a request by Carl's Family Dentistry, 400 West 2nd Street for a certified survey map and site plan approval for a 2,800 square foot building addition. Kevin, I'm assuming you're going to introduce this?
Yeah, as an introduction, Chris, so they're proposing to combine two lots into one and redevelopment of the buildings that are there. I think I would like to hear from the applicants if they're interested in proposing, or you could put together a quick presentation. That would be helpful. I can tell you that staff is very supportive of this. It's a nice redevelopment project and it'd be a nice addition to the downtown area. With that, Tracy, who do we got on attendees that would be able to speak to this? Let me ask Matt. I see Matt's on here, but maybe his
hand is up, so I think he's good. Or no, his microphone's off. B. Allen.
Brad Allen, I will unmute you. Oh.
Unmute.
Okay.
Hi. Hi, I'm Brad with Keller. Am I on?
You're on, yes.
All right. What would you like? I guess let's start with any questions you have. Right now, I'm looking at, we provided the CSM to combine the two lots. Carl's has been operating for several years in that location, and they decided they needed to put a parking lot in to that site for just public safety in general. And then they're expanding their practice, hopefully down the road get a third dock, but right now they're just going to be the two docks. But they want a bigger lobby, little courtyard. It's going to be a nice project. Basically upgrading a 19, I don't know what year that building was even built, in the 90s, I think, early 90s. Get everything up to date, clean, new.
Okay.
That's all I got.
Okay. Kevin or Jason, do you guys have any comments that you'd like to make? Hilarious.
Yeah, I can just note that agreed with Kevin that this is a nice proposal in terms of the apparent quality of the building and improvement to the site. And our focus primarily in the review process has been on parking, both because it is going to require an exception due to the proximity of the parking to the neighboring residential, which we support, and to kind of narrow down and clarify just how much parking is needed. By our current estimate, it is still a little on the high side in terms of the number of spots provided compared to the number that are required. And so we're suggesting that unless there is a demonstrated need for extra parking, that parking could come down. It would make the site design a little bit easier and allow those spaces to be just a little bit further from the street. Last thing I would note is that with the relocation of the entrance to the back of the building, and with the site changing, this is the appropriate time to install a sidewalk along O'Malley to connect the sidewalk system there. There's sidewalk along the north side of the site, and there's sidewalk along O'Malley on the next property to the south. And so connecting those and providing sidewalk access to the main entrance is something that we're looking for. That's all I've got.
Jason, could you touch on the parking exception that's needed for this property?
Yeah, so the specific rule that comes up here is that no parking is allowed within 25 feet of a residential lot when you've got commercial adjoining residential, and the lot isn't big enough to have that large of a setback, and so the proposed parking is within that 25 feet. There is a privacy fence proposed that would, we're confident, help to mitigate headlights and appearance, but it is within 25 feet, so that's why an exception is required. And sorry, one more thing. I would just note that's one of the things that we're looking at in the draft of some edits to the parking ordinance, to consider the fact, a situation like this, that where you are abutting a higher intensity residential, such as this R5 with a three-story building next door, that would be a situation where a lesser setback would likely be acceptable.
Thanks, Jason. I would add as well that there's a number of staff conditions that are outlined in the Strand memo as well as Jason's memo, and just to highlight what Kent is proposing as conditions is that a certified survey map be created, which has actually been updated and included in the packet, so that was provided. But along with that, whenever you do a certified survey map, you have to do stormwater improvements. We also think it's a good idea because they're adding a significant amount of impervious area as part of the parking lot, that they'd be required to do a stormwater requirements that'll meet the standards. So, and the other conditions that are outlined in Kent's memo, really Jason already touched on that. So with that, Chris, I think we'd be open at the staff level for comments or questions.
Okay, I'll just go around to the members and welcome Brian Wallace to the meeting. I think I saw that you popped in. But we'll start with Ryan Malich. Any questions or comments?
No, actually, I don't. Pretty clean, straightforward looking, and yeah, I think it's a good looking project for the site.
Okay, Brad Zeman.
I'm a big fan of the project. Biked around it over the weekend. It'll be a nice compliment to the neighborhood.
Okay, Phil Willems.
Encouraged. Really great. I've taken senior citizens to the dentist there, and they have trouble getting in and out. Cleaning up the back and making the handicapped accessibility better would be great. Also, that O'Malley is parked pretty heavy when they're in operation. This will take a lot of pressure off O'Malley Street and open it up. So I heartily endorse it.
Hardly or highly? I just want to make sure I heard you right, Phil. Did you say highly endorse it? All right, he's laughing, so I'm not sure what you're saying, Phil. You're muted and you're frozen, so it's kind of a scary thing altogether. Okay, thumbs up. Okay, Brian Wallace. Go ahead, Brian Wallace. Or did you freeze too now?
He looks pretty stoic.
I think he froze as well. Chris Thomas.
You guys touched on the setback, and it looks like it's supposed to be 25 feet. And I think in here I saw it said 7 feet. Was there any communication or anything with the residential property that it's up against? Was there any comment from anyone living there?
We haven't talked with anyone there.
Jason or Kevin?
Yeah, I'm looking at, I'm asking Tracy if we sent a notice to them. I know we had a discussion on that because they would get notice as part of the CSM process, I think. But Tracy?
That notice would be part of the village board CSM. I did not notice them for this meeting, no.
Got it. It's not a requirement, but no, we did not notice them.
Okay.
They will be noticed as part of the board agenda packet. You know, one of the things that we thought was important is the way they're mitigating it is the by putting in the screening, the fence along that side, separating the parking lot, you know, from that residential building. And then the other thing I think is important is that the way the headlights and the way the cars will be pulling in, that they're at a lower level. So all those residential units are on like a, you know, higher up 10 feet or a second floor status. So we didn't think at a staff level they would have much of an impact. And really think the intention of that ordinance was really, you know, for impacts that would cause on a single family, because that multifamily is, you know, is almost a quasi commercial use. It's a type of use that we typically see in our commercial area, pretty high intensity. So that didn't seem to apply when you're trying to compare to have a parking lot right next to another quasi-commercial development that would also include, you know, substantial amount of parking.
Chris, any other comments?
No more.
Okay. Ryan Wallace, are you able to speak?
No, I'm good with the project. I think a lot of the things were reiterated already. So.
Okay, thank you. So my only question, Kevin, so we have the apartments next door. Is it going to be one parking lot, kind of a consistent? I know you're saying we're putting a fence in between the two of them, but that's what it would be otherwise, correct? It's basically two parking lots next to each other? Or is there a building there? Right
There's a building.
Okay.
We can probably go to Google Maps, but
I'm on the other side. So, okay, yeah. I know where it's at. Yeah. Okay. All right, and I know Matt's out there too, and I know the building's been there for quite a while, and they've been practicing, and they've been a great community member. I don't see this as being an issue, especially with that fence going up there. I don't think the lights are going to be a problem within this, and I do view it as more of a commercial corridor right there where they're located. So I don't see an issue with this whatsoever. It looks like Matt's coming in. Matt, do you have a comment or two?
Sorry, just coming in, just juggling the kids, trying to get a quiet moment here. I've been listening in, so yeah, we've been excited about this. I think my dad had it when he built the practice in the early 70s, ready for a parking lot, and didn't really have the need, and then we've grown over time. And I think the big thing is the handicap accessibility. We have a lot of senior citizen patients, and the ability to have multiple entrances without any steps is going to be just a nice feature.
Yeah, I agree. I think the building looks, very, very nice in that area too. It's going to fit in well with right by the fire station. Good area for this, so I'm in favor. So. Any other comments or questions from the board members for Matt? I'm looking for your hands. Jason Valeris, do you have your hand up?
Sure, I did. I figured as long as Matt is here, we could repeat the question about whether there's been any communication with Century Commons to the south.
The senior house, not directly for me. I'm not sure if Brad Keller Builders has contacted anyone. We have not directly.
Okay. We were discussing that there would be notification before the village board takes up the CSM, and just as a matter of good practice, suggest that it'd be good for you to reach out and say hello.
Sure. Okay.
Okay. Beyond that, if I don't hear any other questions, looks like we have a motion here. Would somebody like to make that motion?
I'll make the motion to approve.
Okay, Brad Zeman, motion to approve. Do we have a second? Oh, wait. After the second, Brian Kleinmeyer's got his hand up. So do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Second.
Okay, second by Brian Wallace. Okay, comments, any other comments? I think Brian Kleinmeyer put his hand up, so I'm gonna call him Brian for a second.
Yeah, I just want to clarify and make sure that the motion is in fact the recommended motion on page 5 of the packet, which is motion to recommend approval of the Carl's CSM to the village board and to approve the site plan and grant the parking exception subject to final approval by the village engineer.
Brad, is that your motion?
Yes, that is the motion I made.
Okay, and Brian Wallace, is that your second you made?
I am good with a second on that motion.
Okay, then any other comments? Please raise your hand if you have another comment. Okay, seeing no hands. Tracy, roll call vote, please.
Chris Zellner,
Yes.
Phil Willems, Brad Zeman,
Yes.
Brian Malish,
Yes.
Chris Thomas,
Yes.
Brian Wallace.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Okay, then move on to item number 2. Matt, thank you. I think it's Brad. I see you as bailing on the thing, but Brad, thank you for your comments as well. And look forward to seeing you at the village board. Okay, number two. Thank you. Number 2 is discuss and take action on a proposed brew house addition to the southeast corner of the occupied property 1131 Unique Drive. Kevin?
Sure. This is a proposed 2,400 square foot brew house addition to the occupied brewery. Tracy can bring up page 31 of the packet. And I was hoping that somebody from Octopi would be on the call, but I want to make sure that they knew it was at 5:30 and not 6 o'clock. But as part of this, what they'll need to do is get a variance from the Board of Appeals regarding the side yard setback. And I think it'd be helpful for you guys to hear from Jason why the staff is supportive of the variance. And with that, Jason, why don't you go variance?
Sure. So, yeah, thank you. I was just going to ask that we be looking at this exhibit. So the dark outline there is the proposed addition. The existing building extends off to the right of this. We're not seeing the footprint, but it extends, I think, basically in line with the facade of the building that faces Prairie View Drive. And then, of course, it also extends to the west. West is up in this view, and north is to the right. The encroachment is about, I believe it's about 7 feet. The building there, and I guess I would also point out that in addition to the primary purpose of the variance is to allow the encroachment of the building. I would also point out that there are already some legal encroachments by accessory structures along that facade, some storage containers, and that there would be another one, I believe, along the side of this between the building and the street. You kind of see the circle right in the center of that facade. Yep, right there. And then there's also some additional pavement proposed. So right now there are 2 driveway entrances and to the site, and they are proposing to add a 3rd one so that they can navigate in next to the equipment there, and then also to do some infill paving between the 2 existing ones. And though it's kind of hard to make out in the illustration, right along the lot line between each of these 3 driveways to add some new fencing. Reviewing the request for variance, I kind of ticked through in my memo the various requirements in the ordinance, and to boil it down, the basis for supporting the approval of the variance, which we are, is that the lot is somewhat unique in that it's not a square lot. So that corner up where the two streets meet is less than 90 degrees. And so the building effectively faces and fronts on the other street. This is the side street, and as it is kind of moving back and being expanded, it's coming in at an angle toward Prairie View Drive. So the lot is a little bit unique in that respect, and then also the nature of the use of that site, the brewing process. They can't easily just pick and choose where in the building to put the brewing components, is our understanding. They couldn't just, so you see the future expansion to the west, they couldn't just stick it over there. It matters that it's proximate to the existing equipment they already have on the east side of the building. So with those two factors in play, we're recommending that is adequate rationale to approve a variance for the site. To mitigate just how close that is to the site and the additional paving, there's quite a bit of paving then close to the street between those three driveways. We're recommending that there be some really good high quality fencing along there, yet to be specified, but we want to be involved in that conversation, and the village will approve what that fencing is. And also where possible, and primarily this would be probably north of the newest driveway, some more landscaping to further mitigate the views of things. So that's kind of the boiled down version of my analysis and recommendation on the variance.
Thanks, Jason. Chris, I would add that when we looked at this from an engineering perspective, that with this variance and the addition of the additional paving, that the truck turning movements can occur on the property as opposed to out in the right of way. So that was another reason, from at least from an engineering standpoint, of supporting the proposed variance and the expansion. And they'll be back shortly for this future expansion that is showing off to the left of the page, or to the west side of the existing building. So this is a pretty rather small addition, but it's a matter of moving those tanks and reconfiguring them. But that does require them to go into that side yard setback. So with that, Chris, I don't think we have anything more to add, and I think we'd be ready to take any questions.
Okay, commission members, if you have a question, let's see if I can pull you guys all up again here. There you are. Oh, Kristen Runge's joined the group. Hey, Kristen.
Sorry, I'm late. I had a work meeting that ran over.
No worries. Brian, you got your hand up right off the bat. Go ahead. Kleinmeyer.
Yep, I just need to make clear for everyone in the Plan Commission and for the record that, Kevin and Jason obviously have a position on this. I am not part of any recommendation. I will be sitting with the Zoning Board of Appeals for that particular matter, and obviously have to maintain neutrality on something like this. So I just wanted to make that clear for the record.
Okay, thank you. Okay, if you have questions, comments, please raise your hand. Okay, no comments this evening. Everybody's quiet. Brian Wallace.
So a couple of questions. First one probably for Kevin is the three entrances there. Any restrictions on the distance between each of those entrances that are going to be of concern?
No, I think Kent's looked at it, and I think we're satisfied just with the way they laid out how their truck turning movements. We require them to do some turning radius analysis using the proposed trucking that they have to verify that it would, work properly.
And do they have enough? And maybe you haven't gotten this answer from them, but do they have enough area or real estate to turn the trucks so they're not going to be driving through the residential neighborhood that's being built to the south there?
Yes, so they'll need to exit out through the industrial park and not through the residential neighborhood.
Back up Unique.
Correct.
Right, Unique. Yeah. What about? I know this has been a comment in the past about fencing and stuff, and it sounds like they have fencing included here. It's hard to tell exactly where, but are they going to have fencing along the north, I guess, north of the last entrance back towards the building to kind of to seclude and secure that area off, and then run that along the property line on the east side there?
I pull up the site plan, and maybe Jason knows the answer without looking.
I think once we get the site plan up, we can clarify which direction we're talking about. Were you talking about the lot line adjoining the residential to the south?
Well, that's a whole other question, is that area as well. But I was initially talking about north of the newest entrance that's going to go in, the newest drive approach that's going to go in, where they're going to take that fence and bring that back towards the building to tie that all in and close that, as you call the accessory items that are hanging out on the side of the building there.
Yeah. So my understanding is no, that the fence would be just between the driveways, and from a design perspective, I think I'm understanding their design intent correctly, but now you're causing me to take a second look at which line is which here. Now that you say that, there does appear to be a line that extends from the right of way and then squares up back against the building to the north of the driveway. I agree with you. So that does appear to be their intent. Because there won't be a closed gate, my focus was on recommending that there be landscaping in that area, but I agree that that's what they're proposing, is a fence right there.
And from my perspective there, Jason, is I think, they have their patio just to the north of that. It might be beneficial from aesthetics purpose to have some sort of fence, high quality fence, and maybe some landscaping in front of that along that north side to kind of close that off. So any traffic that's on Unique itself is, not going to be looking right at those. Currently, as it says, they already look at them, those tanks and whatnot that are there. But just a thought, just a comment I thought, and then run that same type of fence down to the south or to the south property limits. But then you asked or brought up about the south limits between that and the development. What is going to be the expectation there?
So I'm not aware that they've proposed anything yet, and I think that's going to be a conversation to be had in the context of the larger expansion project. So at this time, nothing's proposed.
Jason, there actually was a condition of approval from previous projects, and they had asked for an extension because they asked for the extension because initially we had concerns about the barrels and other outdoor storage at the back of their building, and so there was a requirement that they needed to gate off and really shield the back of the outdoor storage, and then between that and the building. They asked for a deferral, which made a lot of sense because they were proposing this expansion and another future expansion. That condition still applies. And in fact, they've been working with us on getting a final completion because they have some TIF assistance that they need to be provided and they need to close out this project. And we did make that a condition of approval that they'll need to propose and install the fencing requirements that were part of the original approval. But I think we concurred with them. It didn't make sense till all the other improvements were done. So yes, there will be some additional fencing that's required between their development and the residential development. And I think Occupy has agreed to meet with the Tierneys to see if there's something mutually beneficial in terms of, because we had some similar requirements as part of Don's development, that they had some landscaping and fence requirements, that they could work together and find something that would work for both of them.
So how will we make sure that those things are going to happen, or do we have to include that as part of any recommendation here moving forward?
You can include it, but it's already a condition of approval. And in fact, it's a condition. The steps that we'll take is that every time they get ready to get TIF assistance payment, we've been holding this fence issue aside, knowing that and we agreed to at this time to let it go for this particular year. But in years future, if they don't meet that fence requirement, because Renee will ask me, are they done? Or they met all the requirements, and this fencing issue was a hot button, I would say, a number of years ago. So that is something that's still on our checklist. So every year when they get ready to get their TIF assistance payment, that'll be our way to verify that it's been done.
Okay, and the approval of the quality of the fence, that'll come through you, Kevin.
That's administrative, right?
Right. Thank you.
Okay, any other commission members? Raise your hand, please. Okay, I have one question then. Tracy, can you pull back up the map, please, the site map that was just up? So within this, where the new brew house is located, and we're putting in a drive to go in there, do we have, with their future expansion, future docks, it looks like they're going to have semis that are going to be going on the backside. Are they going to need that location still for semis, or is that going to get replaced when they put those future docks in? Do we know that?
I don't think we know that, Chris. But I thought they were showing all future end, the way their operation works. They needed all those. For assumption purposes, I would assume that they're going to need all those dock locations. They haven't indicated they were going to eliminate those two when the other future ones went in.
And I'm only asking because we have the brew house over there, and then you're putting docks on the other side of the building, and that doesn't seem to make sense to me, but maybe it does, and I just can't see it. Next, with that new brew house, did they indicate anything with regards to noise or anything, if that was going to change, since that's going to be being built there and it's going to be somewhat closer to the residential?
Again, I don't know if we raised the noise issue with them. I wasn't envisioning that this would be much different than their current operation. We did, as a reminder, as a condition of the approval of the residential, because we knew that, you know, this residential would be up against, and we needed to make a change in order for that residential to occur. And that it was very clear that on all the notices, and as people buy lots, that there's a requirement that they need to sign off. They can't, you know, formally complain about the normal operation of a commercial development or a business development such as this, which includes, you know, noise and odors. Brian came on the screen. I think he's going to expand on my answer.
Yeah, just with the, as Kevin mentioned, with the approvals of Arboretum Village, there will be a document that's recorded on, you know, it's obviously not all of the lots in the plat, but I think a number of lots that are closer to the industrial park, there'll be a notice that's recorded on the land, just informing all of the potential purchasers of the lots that there is a light industrial park that is next to them, which could create certain issues. And we specifically identify noise and truck traffic and odor and other things, just to put people on notice that if you do in fact buy one of these lots, you know, it doesn't legally prohibit anybody from making a complaint to the village, but they've been put on notice that it's there. And so therefore, you know, essentially they need to recognize that there's not going to be, you know, they're not going to be able to come to the village board and complain about it, because the village board is going to be able to say, you were aware of the situation and you decided to live there anyway. And quite frankly, I mean, again, there's a lot of people who might want to live this close to someplace like Octopi, because it's going to be a nice place to walk to get some food and drink.
So I would kindly suggest that to Isaac, that when these things come before us, that they have a representative here and ready to answer our questions. I don't think it looks very good. At least I don't like it, that they're not here to answer any questions on behalf of themselves, if we were to have any of those. So I would highly suggest any future things that they come here with, that they are present for this meeting. And as far as Brian Kleinmeyer goes, I don't know if anybody else feels it, but I want mint chocolate chip ice cream every time he comes on the screen. With his background. So that said, any other questions or comments from anybody out there? Otherwise, we'd look for a motion. And that motion is to approve the site plan subject to the applicant obtaining a variance from the Zoning Board of Appeals and all outstanding comments addressed to the satisfaction of the village engineer. Do we have that motion?
I'll make that motion.
Okay, motion by Brian Malich.
I'll give it a second.
A second by Brad Zeman. All right, any other comments? Please raise your hand. Okay, Tracy, Brian Wallace.
Did you include in that motion about the fencing, or are we going to let it go with what was in there previously?
Brian Kleinmeyer?
Oh, I can just say that, so Kevin touched on this too. So we either at the next village board meeting or at the first meeting in October, there is going to be a document or multiple documents going to the village board to address the TIF payment that Kevin had mentioned. As part of that, my understanding is we're going to have a very short addendum to the existing agreement right now that is in fact going to deal with the fencing issue. And my understanding is essentially what it's going to say is, at this point, they can still move forward and receive TIF payments based on the previous expansions that they've done, but they're going to have to provide us with a letter of credit that's going to, and they're going to have to identify, essentially once the expansion is done, then they're going to have to put up the fencing. And if they don't put up the fencing, we'd be able to draw on that letter of credit. Kevin, I think that those are the terms that we've kind of discussed with them. So that's a long way of saying, I don't think that you have to worry for purposes of your motion to have the fence issue addressed, because it'll be addressed in another action by the village board.
Okay, so is the motion, Brian Mouse, the motion still good as is? Okay. Yep. And second, Brad, is it still good? Yes? Okay. All right, any other comments? Raise your hand. Okay, Tracy, call to question.
Zellner,
Yes.
Phil Willems,
Yes.
Kristen Runge,
Yes.
Yes.
Brad Zeman,
Yes.
Brian Malish,
Yes.
Chris Thomas,
Yes.
Brian Wallace.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Okay, next we have item number 3, which is discuss and take action on a request by Kramer Development for a certified survey map, Sarah Lane, Woodland Crest Development. Kevin.
Yeah, as you may recall that as part, and Tracy can bring up the development, that the lot 1 site plan has been approved. And what originally we had actually asked them to put together this certified survey map to make clear that on how these lots would be separated. And then for other reasons other than our request, Mr. Kramer has indicated that he's indicated that he wants to split the lots, because I think there's going to be like a phased in purchase of these lots. And so he's in a position to purchase lots 1 and 2, but not quite lot 3 yet. So we were supportive of the CSM proposal and certainly still are, and think it's a cleaner way of creating that. He's indicated that in the future we did have, we'll see a revision for the lot 2 development. That was pulled, that was right before COVID when it was ready to be on the Plan Commission meeting, and he scrapped it because of COVID, but he's actually ready to come back with a revise for lot 2. But in order for him to move forward with the development of lot 1, he needs to have this land development. And we had a number of conditions that were subject to approval that would still apply. And those conditions, I think, were well summarized in Kent Strauss's letter to me that was included in the packet. And the access easement, I think, it's been resolved to my satisfaction. The Tierneys might not necessarily agree with that, but we do have access as a requirement from Sarah Lane, in terms of sewer and water down to the residential lots. As far as the access to those 2 single-family residential lots, we at the staff level think that access should come through outlot 1. So when outlot 1 is developed or redeveloped, that will be a requirement in terms of having to provide a reasonable access to those residential lots. Jason or Brian, do you want to expand? I'm hoping that Brian does, but I don't know if Jason's got more to add on to this.
Well, I can add a couple of things. First of all, when it comes to ice cream, I would think that we're talking about Blue Moon, Chris, based on the color of the wall, and not mint chocolate chip. But in any event, so we have an annexation agreement that Tracy, I don't know if you can blow up. I guess when you look on the document that's on the page right now, just south of lots 1, 2, and 3, we have Outlot 1, Woodland Crest. And so when Outlot 1 is subdivided, it's at that point within the annexation agreement that we have with Mr. Ganser and Forward Development Group, it's at that point that they need to demonstrate to us appropriate access over to lots 1 and 2. As Kevin had mentioned, you can see on that cover page in the CSM from Sarah Lane heading south kind of straight and then diagonally, there is already a utility easement to run south there. But I think we were told by the developers of these particular lots that until they see exactly how Outlot 1 is going to be subdivided, they're not sure if they want to propose access to the 2 residential lots from Simon Crestway or from Sarah Lane or from both. And the annexation agreement that we have with them allows them to make that decision when Outlot 1 is subdivided. So I think Kevin's correct that at a staff level, we have what we can get at this point related to this development and the two lots on Q.
Okay. Questions from commission members? Please, let's see, how do I get you guys all back out there again? There you all are. Okay, questions, raise your hand, please.
Tracy, you can go back to full screen.
Say that again, Kevin?
I was just telling Tracy, you can go back to full screen. All right, there you go. Thanks.
Okay, so looks like we lost Phil's connection. Any other commission members with questions or comments in regards to this? So obviously Mr. Lawton came on earlier and had comments and in regards to the Tierney property. So I'd like to pull him in if that's okay. Who's pulling people in? If he has any other comments with regards to staff's comments to us or any other requests. Mr. Lawton?
I'm back.
Go ahead.
Yeah, if the village is assuring us that we're going to get access one way or the other, and that's on the record, that's good. Back in May, we were sent a access easement document to run through the CSM that you're considering tonight, and that's what I evaluated, and that's what I commented on. But it sounds like since then, the applicant decided that they don't want to put the driveway through that way, and they want to come in from another direction through Outlot 1. I guess we'll have to take a look at what kind of a design that we'll have, but we don't have anything in front of us, so I guess we can't really evaluate that tonight.
Okay, Brian or Kevin, any comments to that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, yeah, we have an annexation agreement that is clear that the access is going to have to be provided. Mike's right. I mean, there was a document that was shared with him earlier this year. I think at that point when it was shared, our intention, at least at the village level, was and I think we've been talking with the developer at that point, we were talking about kind of having the utility and the access run over the same easement area if we could get it done. I think that there became some issues with respect to exactly how it would be located. And at that point, I think, the thought process was, I would say from Forward Development Group standpoint of the annexation agreement doesn't require us at this point to identify it. And we want to maintain some flexibility. All that being said, when we are approached again with the access easement, I think at a staff level, we would certainly share it with Mike again, because we know that, it's only fair to allow the 2 lots on Q to be able to have some input as to where the access is going to be located exactly.
Just adding to that, this Forward Development, nor does Kramer have control over Outlot, that vacant Outlot. That's still under John Ganser's control. I think we're keeping our options open, and the agreement's clear. We can require access when that lot is developed, and it's not being proposed for current development. But that really prompted us to take a look at this to make sure that they were thinking this through in terms of how they were ultimately going to provide access to those 2 single-family lots. And they did. They're leaving their options open. They provided, if you go to, Tracy goes to page 69 of 74, you'll see it, a 32-foot wide access easement, which would be sufficient to get you out to Sarah Lane, but it stops at that outlot, and we don't have control over what's going to occur on that outlot until we see a development proposed for there.
Jeff Kramer has his hand up.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Good evening, everyone. I just wanted to clarify a couple things. One, so I plan on acquiring the property next month, late October, and I'm going to acquire the whole thing. However, in taking title to it, for a variety of reasons, we plan on separating that out into the 3 lots. We might have different entities taking title to it. And then as was mentioned, phasing will probably occur differently as well. So that's one point. And then second, the CSM contemplates both utility and access at this point. And we had worked with board development if they needed to move that around a little bit. So I think the easement document that Mr. Lawton received and a few others, that's out there. I'm aware of it. I've agreed to provide or to allow the utility and the access if needed through here, assuming it would be probably, you know, a secondary exit and egress, because it's not a real conducive or natural movement to come in and go through those 2 properties and then to the residential lots. So that's where we're at with the project and with the land division. And so if there's an opportunity to reroute some of that through Outlot 1, that makes, I think, a lot more sense with respect to direct access and easement there. So just wanted to chime in with those 2 points. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I asked my question. Does anybody else have any other questions? Okay, that being none.
Brian's got one.
Oh, go ahead, Brian Melich.
And real quick, sorry, just maybe a clarification between what the recommendation is and how that ties to Strand's comments. Specifically, sorry, I was just looking at it. Maybe it's like note 7. I think note 6, maybe the semi on Sarah Lane. So making the motion sort of as it's written, and I think what I'm inferring here is that Strand is giving the thumbs down to the semi on Sarah Lane. By making the motion, are we not going to have a semi-trailer parked on the side of Sarah Lane?
Yeah, and I've talked to Jeff about that. He can certainly add to it. That's something that we'll need to discuss as part of the site plan approval for that next phase or that next development. That's just east of, I guess it'd be lot, I don't know, up on the screen here, but it's the
kind of right on the edge.
The middle lot, basically the middle lot. Yeah, we said at a staff level we would not support truck stopping or loading on Sarah Lane. It just didn't, from our perspective, it just didn't work. And I think Jeff understands that.
Okay. Because I agree with that. I don't want the truck on Sarah Lane. I just wanted to make sure that the motion lined up with that. Then
okay. That said, Brian, do you have a motion?
Sure. Make sure I get it correctly. So yeah, I will make the motion to recommend approval of the CSM to the village board, subject to all outstanding issues being resolved to the satisfaction of the village engineer.
Okay, we have a motion by Brian Melich. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Chris Thomas. Any other comments or questions, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing none. Tracy, roll call vote, please.
Chris Zellner,
Yes.
Bill Willems,
Yes.
Kristen Runge,
Yes.
Brad Zeman,
Yes.
Brian Malish,
Yes.
Chris Thomas,
Yes.
Brian Wallace.
Yes.
Motion passes. Chris, you're on mute.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff Kramer. Thank you, Mike Lutton. Appreciate your comments. Okay, moving on to number 4, public hearing and discussion action on a proposed amendment to the Village of Waunakee zoning code in which 133-16 restriction on rezoning for multifamily use would be repealed from the zoning code. So we're going to have an introduction. Kevin, are you introducing or is Brian introducing?
No, I can, and then Brian certainly can add on to it, but because we separate this into 2 separate agenda items. So this agenda item is for the public hearing, and the action is just the removal of the ordinance amendment with regard to the ratio. And then the second agenda item we can discuss after this. But this public hearing, we would propose that Chris, I would recommend that you open up the public hearing, take comments. But it's as simple as that. We're going to remove the ordinance requirement in terms of the ratio, and it's something that as part of the next agenda item. We're going to really regulate that from a perspective from the plan or from the comprehensive plan. Some of you will recall that we are probably the one and only community in Dane County that has such an ordinance, and it at the staff's perspective, it really belongs as a policy in our comprehensive plan. And that's something we need to deal with separately. Step 1 is to really remove this from our ordinance. And I think you'll get a strong recommendation from the legal on that. Brian?
Sure. I mean, how this came up was, you know, we were looking at this ordinance, and I would say over the last, let's say, year, and we were talking about, you know, I guess one of the concerns was that it didn't cover all of the zoning districts within the village. It only prohibited rezonings to certain districts. And then it was a little bit unclear, the language is a little unclear as to, is it on a project by project wide basis or on a village wide basis? And so as part of that analysis, then we were looking to see, okay, what do other communities do? And other communities have ratios of this nature. And certainly when you get to the next agenda item, that's taken into consideration in addition to the comments that the Plan Commission made at the previous meeting. But we also found is that no communities have this in an ordinance. They deal with it in their comp plan, and they deal with it with policy decision or policy guides. And, you know, I think the most appropriate way to deal with this or address this issue is through the comprehensive plan, because we have a state statute that says any future rezonings or subdivisions that we have in the village must be consistent with the comprehensive plan. So it makes the most sense to tie it back to the comprehensive plan. So as opposed to manipulating this ordinance and making changes to it, it seemed like the most efficient and most legally appropriate way to do this is let's get rid of the ordinance. And then to the extent that we want to address this from a policy standpoint, we put that in the comp plan. And that's how the two are tied together.
Okay, thank you. So then I am going to open up the public hearing. It is 6:27. And if you'd like to make a comment on this item, please raise your hand if you are a participant, or an attendee, I should say. Tracy, let me know if anybody would like to speak.
I don't show anyone raising their hand at this moment. Nothing.
All right, giving it my all to let anybody, if they have a comment, make it. Right now, going once, twice. Okay, then I'm going to close our public hearing. It is 6:28. And board or commission members, questions for Kevin or Brian or a motion? Please raise your hand if you have any. Kevin, you have your hand.
I did. I just wanted to add that we did receive correspondence from 2 citizens that have been shared. One was an email from, was it the Ashmores?
Linda Ashmore, yes.
Linda Ashmore. And I think we could, at a staff level, we'd be willing to address that verbally tonight at the meeting. And then I think that, Chris, you received just before the meeting start an email from Ann Lewandowski that I think she asked if you would take the time to read.
Okay. Do you want to go through the first one, other one, while I pull up her email?
Sure. I think Brian's going to start, and then Jason and I are going to fill in as needed. Brian, is there something you want up on the screen that would be helpful? Maybe just the original email?
Well,
or we could just do it broadly too.
I was just going to say, what I would say is too, I think when we get to the next agenda item, I had seen Ms. Lewandowski's comment, and I think, she submitted it as a written comment that she asked to be read into the record when the public hearing was open. I do think that her comment is probably more related to the second public hearing item. And so I would suggest maybe waiting until that point and then reading it in when we have the public hearing. I think that a number of the comments that were made in the other email probably touch a little bit more on the second agenda item or the next agenda item than on this one. But I'm certainly willing to try to kind of kick off addressing these questions because they are related, the two agenda items. And then I'll try to answer some of the questions, but then kind of rely on Kevin and Jason to chime in when they feel appropriate. And even though some of this is going to be skipping ahead a little bit as it pertains to the language in the next agenda item, but in order to give the Plan Commission the full flavor, I think it is appropriate to address it right now. Chris, it sounds like you're okay with that.
Yes, go ahead.
So the first question is what comprises development review, and can that be specified in the amendment? And so to me, that is getting at, if you look at page 73 of your packet, this section 1B of the resolution, there's language in there where there's a reference to, based on development review, there would be a little bit of flexibility that would be provided on the proposed 70 to 30% ratio. And by development review, I would say that this is what would be our normal standard practice. And that is, recommendations that are made by staff, and then, certainly meetings at the Plan Commission and the Village Board level. For example, if we have rezonings, we would have public hearing processes before both the Plan Commission and before the Village Board. That's our practice. And if we have any type of land division that's going to occur, we have a public hearing before the Village Board, whether that's certified survey map or preliminary plat. So when we talk about, the potential flexibility as a result of development review, that is following our normal practices. And then the question is, can that be specified in the amendment to the comp plan? My recommendation would be that we don't get into that in the amendment for a couple of reasons. One, we already have a lot of language in our code that gets into specifics on this. And the other thing is, it may be the case, and I'm just spitballing here. I mean, at some point in time, the village may want to amend its code to say, you know what, right now we have flexibility as to whether or not we're going to have on zoning a public hearing before the Plan Commission and a public hearing before the Village Board. We might want to adopt a code provision that says we're gonna definitely have public hearings before both. Right now, only from a statutory standpoint are we required to have the public hearing before the board for zoning. We always just have it before the Plan Commission too. If we start modifying what are our detailed proposals in our ordinances, then we would necessarily have to make all these changes to the comp plan too. And I think that that's unnecessary, especially with the detail in the code. So we do have a process in place already that deals with the development review, and I think that's spelled out in our code, and I think that that's my recommendation is that's where we would leave it. On the second question that Tracy has up, I'm for the most part, I'm going to kind of defer to Kevin and Jason on this, but the question is, can this be postponed until transitional zoning is passed? And if you recall, a couple meetings back, we also talked about potentially making some changes to the comprehensive plan regarding some traditional zones. I'm thinking about 4 specific areas in the downtown area. And at that point, the Plan Commission, I think appropriately so, said, hey, let's focus on some other things, and staff bring this issue back to us at a later time. I think at this point, we don't know when that transitional zoning issue is going to come back to the Plan Commission. I think it's an entirely separate topic from what we're talking about tonight. And so I don't think it would be, I would recommend that we don't postpone anything, and that we have the discussion tonight on the proposed zoning amendment and on the proposed comp plan amendment and move forward with that. And then when transitional zoning comes back, address the transitional zoning at that point. I don't know, Kevin or Jason, if there's anything you want added on that topic right now.
Not really. I think you said it well. They're just not tied together. We can't try and connect these two. We need to deal with the ratio, and at some point in the future, we'll deal with the transitional.
I would note just that I am perceiving a perception here on the commenter's part that this change is going to spur more development in these near downtown areas. And so shouldn't we figure all that out first before we make this change? And I actually think the opposite is true. I think that the current circumstances have been pushing development to the downtown, and that pressure is going to be relieved a bit by removing the ordinance.
Thanks, Brian. Or thanks, Jason. Go ahead, Brian.
Okay, so I think the second one kind of transitions into this transitional zoning issue. I think when redeveloping an area, will there be an opportunity for citizen input early in the process? I'd like to see a neighborhood meeting before a public hearing. Well, as I touched on before, we certainly do have public hearings before the village board and before the plan commission. We even have more public hearings than are required by the statute. But I can also say that, I've been a part of meetings before where many times, or if not all the times, early in the process where a potential property owner or developer is meeting with village staff, those property owners or developers are strongly encouraged to go meet with the neighbors very early in the process. Lots of times even before or right after it comes to the plan commission for a conceptual discussion. So I think our normal process has these types of neighborhood meetings incorporated into it. I don't know if Kevin or Jason, if you want to add to that.
It's part of our process now. We encourage developers to have neighborhood meetings, and I think it'd be challenging to make that a requirement, but we'll continue to ask them and encourage them. And we've told them that if you expect this to go well at the plan commission, you need to have the neighborhood and what the neighborhood's what the reaction is going to be before you start to present. We try and, from a perspective, we try and get a first conceptual review by the plan commission, and then after the initial plan commission meeting, then we tell them to go have a neighborhood meeting so that the plan commission is aware and gives some feedback as part of the process. But I think at every plan commission that we've had is that the feedback our plan commission gives is go talk to your neighbors. And I think you heard it like on a previous agenda item. I think the staff does it and our plan commission does it. Make sure that they're engaging the neighborhood around what that they're proposing to redevelop.
Okay, the next question, I think I already addressed this next question on the front end. What is prompting the rule change? Again, this has been an ordinance that we've been looking at for quite some time, and as we went through the review process, it became apparent to us that the appropriate place to address this is in the comp plan itself and not in the village zoning. And like I said earlier, we already have a lot of language in the village zoning code related to subdivision zoning, things of that nature. So, but it was our review of the zoning language itself that prompted this discussion that we're having tonight. What will comprise a development? Well, I would say this, if land is already zoned right now to allow for a particular use, the village, other than site plan review, doesn't, we can't, there's limited control on us. So I think when we're talking about development here and part of the discussion that we're having, we're talking about when a property owner or a developer needs to come to us and needs approval. Most likely it's a combination of things, including zoning and land division. And so that's likely what would be the development. And that's then what triggers our standard development review. And then for the second portion of the question here, what is the development going to look like? That's where the public gets to voice its opinion on a proposed development as part of the processes that we have. And certainly plan commission and village board members, their opinions obviously matter significantly as to what something is going to look like. So I would say that what the development is going to look like is going to come from the processes that we have and the involvement that the public and the plan commission and the village board have already. And so I think that's the best way to answer that question.
Well said.
Please consider, so on this language here, so within, if you look at, page 73 of the packet, we have some language there that says redevelopment projects and senior housing projects are encouraged in the village. I would note that the existing language in the comprehensive plan right now I believe has language that says I've lost my place here, that redevelopment projects and senior housing projects are exempt from the existing ratio that we have. So while I believe that the language that we've drafted makes sense, the language that we're proposing actually would give the Plan Commission and the Village Board more control over redevelopment projects and senior housing projects than what is in the existing comprehensive plan, where it notes that these are exempt. And I think that, that answer likely then kind of addresses some of the, the concerns that may be, within that question in number 7. And Kevin, and Jason, I don't know if you guys want to add to that at all.
I think what you said is that we're really changing the focus from the numbers, the ratio, to good design, and does it fit in with that particular neighborhood? And neighborhood is more than just a subdivision. It's a much broader area within a neighborhood.
Yeah, and I would add just that I think saying that redevelopment projects and senior housing projects are encouraged in the village is consistent with the comp plan. That's not an indiscriminate, let's replace what's old with new, but we want to encourage reinvestment where sites have not gotten investment, and there are still sites that could use some investment. So I still like to see that language.
And then the last, I'm also concerned that new developments would be exempt from the proposed housing ratio. I guess I would just again point to the language on page 73. I would say, the language that talks about that the ratio is not going to apply is that's when we're evaluating a project on a that is either just multifamily or mixed use, so commercial and multifamily. We're going to have control over that process to the extent that somebody is seeking a rezone. So I just want to clarify, even though those types of developments under the language that's been drafted would be exempt from the housing ratio, there are still determinations that the Plan Commission and the Village Board would be making before those developments could move forward. And that would, whether they're part of the 70-30 that's been proposed or not. So I don't, although they may be exempt from the 70-30 ratio based on the language that's been drafted, they're certainly not exempt from our decision-making process.
Chris, you're muted, but just adding on to what Jason or to what Brian said, they're not exempt. And Chris, I would just say let's defer Ann's comments to the next agenda item.
Agreed.
So any questions from the Plan Commission members, we'd be open to that.
All right, hold on one second. My screen changed. Okay. I've got it. Everybody.
Full screen tracing.
Okay, if you have a question or comment, please raise your hand. Brian Wallace?
Just to be clear, right now, what we are talking about is agenda item here about the ordinance at this point, right?
Correct. Not the ratio.
All the waters here. So we're going to talk right now about the ordinance and removing that specific line item from the ordinance.
Correct.
No more questions.
Okay, any other commission members with questions, please raise your hand. Chris Thomas.
Do these agenda items kind of have to be together, right? I mean, I don't want to remove the ordinance and then we go to the next agenda item and we don't approve new language in the comp plan. So now we're sitting with no language anywhere. Is that a condition, or how do we handle that?
Brian?
Well, I think if you would prefer, we can move on to the next agenda item and address that. And then have the discussion on it, and then come back and make a motion on this and make a motion on the second one, if that's what you prefer. both of them are going to have to go to the village board for whatever action is taken. So I mean, you could conditionally do it too, but I think it would be easier. If it would be easier, because I would prefer not to have a conditional motion on the first one if essentially the condition is going to be removed as soon as you take action on the second item. So I would say it might be more appropriate just to have the table this item for the time being and move on to the next agenda item and then come back to it.
Okay. Other comments before we table? Potentially table, I should say.
Well, I think that, to Chris's point and to Brian's point, I think that makes a good sense, because the ordinance, I can understand it being the ordinance is more of a law issue. And I think tabling that until we have an understanding of what the tool of the comp plan is going to be for not only us, but those that follow us in the future and making decisions for the growth in the village of Waunakee, I think is important. So I would prefer to move on to the next item.
Okay, do you want to make a motion to table this to move to the second? Don't we have to do that, Brian?
I don't think, because they're both on the same agenda item, I think that we can just, from a procedural staff, move on knowing that we're going to be coming back to this when it comes time to action.
Okay, I will defer to our attorney's advice, and let's just move on to that second one then. So that is public hearing and discussion action on proposed amendment to the 2017 Waunakee Westport Joint Comprehensive Plan, in which language addressing the ratio between single-family housing and multifamily housing in the village of Waunakee would be modified. Okay, do we need an introduction to this one before I open the public hearing? Or Kevin, do you want to just give a little overview on what we're talking about?
Sure, I can do that briefly. This really sets the policy in terms of the guidelines that will be set forth when we consider new development or redevelopment in the village. And this would be the guidelines, and as opposed to having hard and strict rules, these will be the guidelines that you'll look to when you have proposals in front of you. Rezones have to be consistent with our comprehensive plan. So these guidelines and policies will be important. So you need to take them into consideration. The other thing I'd add is, there's a little bit of discussion is, what's the number, and I think we landed a little bit on the last plan commission meeting of having a range of ratio that we should be considering. And we said that by neighborhood. And when we say neighborhood, again, that doesn't mean a particular subdivision or plat. It really means a region within the village. So that and planners will say this better than an engineer, is that we want to have that cross section of housing throughout the village, not just concentrated in one particular area. We just use those the ratios that were I think the plan commission wrestled with it a little bit last. So what's the number? Is it is it 70, 60, whatever that number was? I think that can have some further dialogue and discussion tonight on where we land. And I also thought it was important to get some public input. I don't think we have a lot of public input tonight on this, but I thought it was important to get that public input and for you to consider that before you make a recommendation to move forward with this. Brian or Jason?
The only thing I'd add is that, obviously the staff's recommendation is that we do approve both of these, understanding the plan commission may want to, obviously have the discussion and that it's open to tweak anything. The only thing I want to point out is, for a comprehensive plan and for a zoning change, they both have to go to the village board, and there will be additional public hearings, both for the zoning amendment and for the comprehensive plan amendment at the village board level. So there is additional opportunity for public input at that level.
Jason, any comments before we go to public hearing? Opening it.
Not at this time. I probably will later, but nothing to add at the moment.
Okay, then it's 6:48, and I'm going to open up the public hearing. If you'd like to address the commission on anything, please raise your hand if you are an attendee.
I don't see any hands raised.
Okay, give it a few seconds here.
Well, if you want to buy a little bit of time, Chris, this is the appropriate time to read Ms. Lewandowski's letter too, or email.
Okay. I will do so. Where did you go now? Okay, the email from Ms. Lewandowski I received today. She had attended, I don't need to read that part. I would very much like to register in support of the 75-25 changes proposed in tonight's meeting. Please read my attached comments for the record. I understand, to the Waunakee Planning Commission, I understand concerns that this does not immediately address affordability. I certainly hope you keep those concerns in the forefront as you proceed to approve projects in the future. However, I support the changes to the Waunakee ordinance on the 75-25 single family to multifamily ratio. I support it because with certain developers, they may be able to offset the cost of single family homes by improving a multifamily lot. By the virtue of how single family homes are created, one or two at a time, the multifamily units must wait until the end of the project. Should an economic or other force happen that disrupts the anticipated development schedule, the developer has no recourse. Whereas if the developer can offset costs earlier in the project, single family home prices may be able to be offset, driving down costs and helping with affordability. In addition, such a strict ratio that we are consistently bumping up against seems to limit your flexibility in response to market demands or changes. My understanding is the multifamily ratio impacts a range of housing choices in the attached housing market, including any owner-occupied housing that does not have a covenant against rental use. Meaning, we are not simply talking about rental properties versus ownership, but this change impacts attached condos as well that serve as an entry to the Waunakee market. I believe this change is needed to bring a wider range of housing choices to the village, benefiting employers, current residents, and the tax base. I repeat my question to focus deeply on the affordability portion when looking at these projects in the future. Thank you for your time, Ann Lewandowski. Okay, any hands go up in that time frame?
No.
Okay, then I am going to close the public hearing and open it up to Plan Commission members. Brian Malich, I know you were pretty strong on this one last time. Do you want to make any comments in regards to it?
I was hoping to let it play out a little bit here.
Well, that's why I called you on the spot.
Appreciate it. Well, I still like the 75-25. I mean, that's nitpicking, if you will. And I guess I still had a question. You know, it reads, you know, under Part B for new developments. You know, that's not what I wanted. Generally speaking, is this still intended to be kind of a community-wide analysis? All of Waunakee, or are we trying to use this on more of an isolated standpoint?
Jason, do you want to take that one?
Sure. The intention is community-wide, I think, as drafted, and individual projects. If they're large projects and they include multiple housing types, it could apply. So if someone like a Viridian is coming in and doing an entire neighborhood arguably on their own, it would make sense to consider the balance within a single development, but projects are often smaller than that. And so in that case, then it would be considered in the context of what is already around or is planned to be around a smaller scale development.
Okay, and maybe that's maybe a question is the way to do that best. So say we've got a cornfield or two on the edge of town. Somebody wants to come in and put in some number, maybe not a big number, 50 single family homes. The way I'm reading this, the way this is worded, they're not required to also sort of squeeze in a multifamily percentage. Is that correct?
That's correct. And there's not, that's not going to be clearly spelled out as, you know, this is exactly how it applies. But again, the conversation should be, okay, well, if we have 60 acres of single family homes here, what's around it and how does it relate? And is any part of that acreage, does it really make a lot of sense to include some multifamily? And so it would be a process of discussion and maybe some attempt at persuasion, but there's not, again, it's a guideline in the ordinance, not or excuse me, in the comp plan and not an ordinance to say thou shalt have this or that.
Added to that, right out of B in the second paragraph, the last last sentence, the ratio is flexible. It's based on, you know, development review. It's what's important is the building size and how it fits in with that neighborhood design. But the first part of that is the ratio is flexible.
Okay.
Brian, does that answer your question?
Yeah, so I think I'm good. Between the comment about the flexibility and then that it is really more of a community-wide analysis. I didn't want to get into a situation where we're kind of pinching. Sure, the Viridian, you know, I don't even know how big that thing is, 160 some acres, lots of units within their own development. They have the flexibility to do some things. But if there's maybe a smaller development that wants to go on the edge of town that is just looking to supply some single family homes, I didn't want to somehow have this sort of stick them with doing something that maybe wasn't the intent or wasn't even the fit for their development. So yes, I think my questions are answered.
Good. And I think this gives us more flexibility as mentioned earlier. So with exactly what we're talking about there. Brian Wallace, you had your hand up?
Sure. So I've listened to what's been talked about here, and I think there's a few things I'd like to bring to the committee's attention and see where we want to go with it. So I'm going to start with, obviously, it's paragraph B. For new developments, and this kind of goes back to what Brian just said, for new developments, actually Brian and Jason, for new developments that include both single family and multifamily components, the goal is approximate mix of 70-30. First of all, I agree with Brian. I think that should be closer to 75-25 because of the fact, as Kevin pointed out, the ratio is flexible. We're going to have the opportunity to go one way or the other on that whenever a project is brought to the commission, whether it's us or somebody 5 or 10 years from now. The one concern I have with the way that's spelled out with both single family and multifamily, and Brian brought it up and Jason kind of talked about it, is we don't really talk about if it's just a single family development, single family home development. So somehow we need to include that here where it's, and I'm not a lawyer, I'm not made for writing this stuff, but for new developments that include single family homes or both single family, multifamily, or something to that perspective. So we're covering both gamuts because when we look at the ratio on hopefully a village-wide and a single project, what the specific project is and on a village-wide potential ratio, we need to be able to have the flexibility to allow maybe a small single family development that is only single family home because in the big perspective of the village of Waunakee, here's where we're at on that ratio. Here's where we're landing on that. Does that make sense? You follow me on that?
I do.
I do.
Okay. So the rest of that, I think on that first paragraph, I think is good about the ratio being flexible and it's still based on development review, which gives the flexibility and the tools to those that sit on the commission and the village board to, give it the thumbs up or thumbs down. Now on the next paragraph, this is where I get a little heartburn, is for new developments that contain only multifamily housing. Basically, we're saying there's no requirement here. You can go out and we could put up 2,000 units of apartments on the edge of town, and that can be approved without any concern. And now what does that do to the village-wide ratio? So I think there needs to be some component there. Again, the ratio is flexible. So we can put that wording in here in somehow, some way, so that if there is a large multifamily development proposed, we have the flexibility and the tools to come back and say, hey, wait a second, that's going to really throw us out of balance here. Or maybe not, but at least give us the opportunity, whomever sits on this commission, to make, and have that ability to assess that. And then as far as the last paragraph, again, before I get to that, it still goes back to, development review, building site, neighborhood designs. I think that's all good stuff, but I think there could be a little more detail in this so that it is specific. I know Jason kind of said, well, it's ambiguous a little bit, and maybe that wasn't the exact word to use, but I think we could be a little more detailed about what the expectation is here. And then as far as redevelopment projects and senior housing projects are encouraged, I think that's self-explanatory. That's saying, hey, they're not exempt. We encourage those developments, but again, they're going to come back to these two paragraphs and how they relate to the village-wide expectations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Brian, Jason, Kevin, do you want to respond to that in any way?
I would just respond that, no, they're good comments. And I think we can continue on with the comments, but if there's, if there's consensus that we want to include some language changes, I've been trying to keep notes here on how I think that Brian has suggested, but I think I want to, look into you, Chris, to get the reaction from all the planning commission members to see if there's consensus with making those changes that Brian is suggesting. And if he does, then I think I have enough information, but it's only one of seven. So I think you can just continue on.
Okay. All right. Next person, Kristen Runge, any comments?
No comments. Overall, I think the changes in both will be positive.
Okay, Phil Willems.
They're positive. I was thinking while we were talking about this proposed development down where the veterinarian clinic is. That's all multi-family affordable housing. This would help us with that, wouldn't it?
Okay, I think Phil said this would help us with the veterinarian clinic, the new apartments that are going down by the veterinarian clinic. I had a hard time hearing him. I don't know if everybody else did. Kevin, did you get what Phil said?
I think so. I think he's saying, would this help us with the approval process for the vet clinic, and really doesn't have an impact. The vet clinic project can move forward with the current ordinance and the current language in the comp plan. And we'd point out that's one of the reasons why we're proposing the changes, because different rules apply to different parts of the village. Because that's in a C1D, they don't have to comply with the ordinance, which to me doesn't make any sense. Why does one part of the community not have to apply to the ordinance, another part do? And that's one of the reasons what we're trying to clean up here. So does it help? It just really doesn't have any impact. Does it make it clearer going forward that when we approve a project like 701, that, as Brian Wallace suggested, hey, we should be considering that, are we still within that 75-25 or 70-30 before we approve this project? Are we still within those guidelines? Does this still make sense? Is it still within our general policy requirements? And granted, we're still flexible on it. We don't have to have to look at it, under a microscope and in a vacuum. We really want to look at that whole thing village-wide. Does it make sense? I actually think it would help us in terms of understanding it. It would bring it into it and understanding approving a project like that, as opposed to now we're just using the ordinance that's already been rezoned.
Okay, thanks. Chris Thomas.
I'll just say that, I like this for the flexibility that it allows. I'll also say that I second what Brian Wallace said about the language and sticking with 75-25. And if, for specifically having a paragraph that calls out new developments that are only multifamily, I would think we'd want a paragraph that calls out new development that's only single family. So again, I think I kind of just piggyback on what Brian Wallace said. That's about it.
Okay, thank you. Brad Zeman.
I think the rest of the board members spoke and really reflected my thoughts as well. So good work, everyone.
Brian, are you holding your pen up or do you want to talk? Is that what that's
Well,
for?
I mean, when you think it's appropriate, I mean, we've heard comments from a number of people, and I have ideas on both of the paragraphs if it's something that you want to consider. I mean, so I just want to make you aware of that.
Okay. My comments are basically almost verbatim to the other folks. I'd like to keep the 75-25 in the comprehensive plan. The wording could probably be modified a little bit from what everything, and it sounds like, Brian, you have some suggestions for that wording.
Well, so in each case here, what I'm suggesting is potentially, so when you look at the second paragraph there for 1B, so after neighborhood design, you could put in a parenthetical that would say, this allows for appropriate smaller single family development only. And, to make clear that when we are talking about flexibility, we're specifically noting that the flexibility would allow the smaller single family development that the Plan Commission members have talked about. So I would say that I don't necessarily think that's required to put it in there, because I think that we already have that flexibility. But to the extent that the Plan Commission would like to see something specifically identify that issue, I think that's would do it. And then it certainly, and it wouldn't limit the other types of flexibility, but it would make clear that the single family, the appropriate development that Brian spoke about, where, hey, it makes sense just to have single family development this, and we don't want to use some type of ratio to force upon that development multifamily, that's been contemplated as part of the change. That's one change. And then the other change would be a similar parenthetical at the end of the next paragraph that would say, review to consider impact on 70-30 community-wide ratio, or something to that effect. In other words, to make clear that when we're looking at this multifamily, because there's certain types of development where it makes a lot of sense, where you're just going to have the multifamily. And, one would be, I think, that we've seen is the Hovde project, the Lamp House project. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And you wouldn't want my assumption based on what the village board did is you wouldn't want any type of housing ratio to negatively impact a project like that. There's other circumstances where you still might want to have it done, but you certainly want to have a discussion at that point on, okay, how is this going to impact a ratio that we're in favor of village-wide? And so you could add a similar parenthetical there to note that when you're going through this review, that's something that should be taken into consideration. The overall 70-30 village-wide goal.
So where is the 70-30? I mean, I feel like listening to the plan commissioners, I think they want to stay with the 75-25. So is that 70-30 a different?
That's what he meant. I think Brian meant 75-25.
Oh yeah, I mean, you guys can certainly change. I mean, I would say this. If for example, if we were to modify the comp plan and for example, add those two parentheticals and then change the language in the first paragraph of B to 75-25. I mean, obviously staff, I think, would like to see the percentage change a little bit, but I still think that we've made enough of a change by allowing flexibility on these that it improves the situation for the village moving forward.
So I'm going to give a hypothetical quick just to make sure we're all on the same page. So that flexibility would, let's just say there's 6 subdivisions that get proposed and we've got 750 single family homes within all those, but there's no multifamily in any of those. Would this then not allow for us the flexibility to say either yes or no to 250 units of multifamily somewhere else by themselves in a small subdivision for that? Is that?
Well, I think you'd have the flexibility to do that. I think your planner would argue against that, but I don't want to put words in Jason's mouth.
I'm just giving an example of what could get proposed. The fear of Brian saying, that all of a sudden we have apartments, I think it was Brian that said apartments all over, that we've got several developers that want just putting apartments in. So I'm just trying to put that into perspective of what that would mean or how that should get done.
Yeah, what I heard, Chris, the Plan Commission, the consensus here is that, yeah, you do want to be able to have that really spelled out in the policies that, okay, we're going to consider the 75-25 as a village-wide, if there's a single-family project that goes forward, hey, it can be all single-family. If there's a multifamily project goes forward, that's fine, but we're still going to consider the village-wide 75-25. And I think that's the language changes that Brian is talking about to give you that flexibility that you're not going to be held to the 75-25, but that's your starting point when you're looking at a project going forward. That if you got a subdivision that's got 100 single family, it doesn't necessarily have to have multifamilies. You got flexibility as long as and I think you point to, like, as a general rule, and that's what it is now. We're at about 75-25 to multifamily, single family. Same as for multifamily. If you got a project that comes forward and by adding those units, you stay within that realm 75-25, and then it's consistent with the policy. If it's not, you got some flexibility to change it. But if you got a project that comes forward and has 3,000 multifamily units, and it would totally switch that ratio to like something like 65-35, it'll be easy to point to say that's not consistent with what our guidelines are, and that doesn't, not that we couldn't approve it, but it's not consistent from a starting point of being consistent with what we want to see of that 75-25.
So based on that, and Kevin, nice job with it. I just wanted everybody to hear things to make sure you're clear and understanding on what it means that we're doing. I think that did a nice job of laying it out. Is everybody comfortable with that language that was proposed by Brian? I mean, that's the question right now. If you're not comfortable with it, Brian Wallace, go ahead.
I'm not extremely comfortable with it. I'd like to see it more consistent in how it's written for each type of development, whether we encapsulate single family only, single family and multifamily mix as one. I'm fine with that, but I'm not comfortable with just adding a sentence at the end. For example, in the third paragraph, it says specific, no specific village-wide housing ratio will apply. From my perspective, that has to go away.
Agreed. I think that's what we heard tonight, Brian.
So however that paragraph is worded, in essence, similar to the paragraph above it. And then if we want to add a third one about single family only, fine, or mix that with the first paragraph that's there, something to that effect. But I think that's where we got to get that consistency down. And then the other item here that I think Ann brought it up in her notes is, and it's warranted, and I don't know if that can be addressed in the comp plan, is the fact that if a developer comes forward and they have a development that's, let's just say it's 50-50, but hey, from a review and how it sits with the village as a whole, from a 50% single family, 50% multifamily, we need to be able to say, you know what, if you want to build that multifamily first or in conjunction and not wait till the end, however that ratio, we can't hold it to the ratio while the project is being built. That's got to be a kind of, hey, at the end of the project, this is what we want that to look like. And so how do we allow them the freedom to build it in those phases that are appropriate to, and not be hamstrung by the 25-75 ratio? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think that's consistent with all what I've heard tonight from all the Plan Commission members. And I'm just, maybe asking Jason or Brian is, how do we accomplish this? I think we're all saying the same thing, but trying to wordsmith this tonight may be difficult. We may need to either have to give us some leeway and allow us the staff to do it, or we bring it back next month. I'm comfortable with either one. I totally understand what you're saying, Brian Wallace, with regard to removing that second part of that sentence and adding something about single family. And I think I also heard you say you want some more detail on that importance of building site and neighborhood design. You wanted some more detail to go along with that. Those are the three things that I wrote down that I think are necessary in order to get your consensus on approval.
The question I would have is, when was this supposed to go to the board?
Well, I mean, I would say that's up to the Plan Commission. We were talking about taking it in October, but I would say this. I think it's going to be a lot more efficient and hopefully a lot more clear to everyone at the Plan Commission to actually bring it back with new language. I think trying to wordsmith it during this meeting is going to be difficult. And so, but there's also not a reason why, I mean, there's no reason in the world not to bring it back in October and then go take the stuff to the village board in November, unless there's some reason why the plan commissioners don't want that to happen.
Yeah, and the question I would have, Brian, and maybe I'm overstepping my bounds here, but if it's simply basically these two items, how quickly can it, if we want to move it along, how quickly can it turn around and come back to a meeting, or even if it's a special meeting, just to address these two items if they're reworded? If it's warranted, that's,
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say we could do it pretty quickly. I'm stumbling because I'm not really, I mean, this is something that staff has been looking at for a long time. At the same time, I'm not aware of any urgency that says this needs to get done in October, for example, at the village board than November. And so if there is an urgency that I'm not aware of, then somebody would need to tell me, but I don't think that we're in a position to have to call a special meeting. And so I think it just then it comes back in October, and all that we have to do is we have to pull a particular public hearing notice that has not appeared in the paper yet and make sure it doesn't go in on Thursday. Things are very cumbersome when it comes to the comp plan, because for the public hearing at the village board level, you need a 30-day notice, and that creates some issues. But that's not enough of, I mean, Kevin, I don't know what your opinion is, but that's certainly not enough for me to say, let's try to wordsmith this thing and do anything that would not make the plan commission happy.
Not comfortable with trying to wordsmith it tonight. I think we got consensus from the plan commission in terms of how we move forward. And with these, 2 to 3 changes to this language, we'll have full support of the plan commission. And I'd like the plan commission to see the final outcome of what you're recommending. So that way, when it gets to the board, that we can say, we got the full support of the plan commission, of what we're proposing.
All right,
that being said, it looks like Jason's got some language.
Yeah, before Jason pops in, based on what Brian said, now Brian made his comments, but no, I didn't have any other commission members agree with him at this point. So to say we have consensus, I don't know. So I just want to make sure we have consensus with what Brian indicated that he thought was important for us to put in here. So that said, I'm just going to kind of go around and say yes or no that you agree with Brian, or if there's something else that you want to add. Okay? Chris Thomas.
All right, first I'll say I agree with Brian. Second, I would like some clarity on, the language keeps saying new developments, and then there's talk of redevelopment at the end, and the old language specifically said, was it that redevelopments are exempt? So how do redevelopments fit into this? Are we still looking at that on a case-by-case basis? I think Kevin said earlier, what happens if someone comes in and wants to build a 3,000 unit building? What if they did that through a redevelopment? Would we be able to say no? How does that fit into the 75-25?
Okay, perfect. Kevin, keep that. Jason, Kevin, and Brian, keep that question. I'm going to keep going around, and then we'll see if there's any others that pop in. Phil, I hope we can hear you.
Okay, I hope you can hear me. I'll try to get close. I think we should rework the whole, bring it back to next month, and then take it to the village board in November. There's nothing pressing to change it today.
Okay, thank you, Phil. Kristen Runge?
Lots of smart conversation and good comments. I agree with the idea of reworking it and wordsmithing it and then bringing it back next month.
Okay. Brian Malich?
Yeah, I think I'm in agreement. Losing the no specific ratio down under the multifamily only helps quite a bit. Hitting the 70-25 and then just however the language works, that at the end of the day, the 75-25 is the targeted village-wide balance. However that ebbs and flows from one project to the next, I'm pretty flexible on.
Okay, and Brad Zeman?
I agree with Kristen.
Which means you agreed with what Brian and everybody else was saying. Okay, got it. Perfect. All right, that said, I'm going to go to Jason because he had his hand up earlier, and maybe you can address Chris's comment right off the bat. Go ahead.
Yeah, so new developments and redevelopments are not distinguished in any way. They are treated the same. If you're creating new units, that's what we're paying attention to. So we can maybe wordsmith to clarify that, but the intent of saying new development was you're building something new, whether it's in a redevelopment context or a greenfield context. So that's the only thing I'll add to that. I did post in the chat a suggested variation on that paragraph. I think we've heard consensus that everyone would prefer to allow more time for wordsmithing, so I don't know that we need to spend time with that. And the last comment I'll make is to briefly go out on a limb and say that I've never been a fan of having a percentage of any kind. And if you're going to have a percentage, encourage you to consider the 70-30 rather than the 75-25. To my mind and to my professional viewpoint, having a ratio that is in effect trying to have the number of attached or apartment type units that is lower than the state average is going out of your way to exclude people of certain incomes and by extension certain races. And that's not something that people are going to see the same way, but would encourage you to consider that.
Okay, Brian? Anything else additional?
Brian, me?
Brian
oh,
Glenn.
sorry. No, I don't. I agree with Kevin and Jason that, and not with all the comments from the Plan Commission members, we need to modify this language and bring it back to you.
Okay, I would just say that thank you guys for all of your input tonight. This has been a very productive meeting in getting the information. This is something that we needed to do. We need to make a motion to table these for the next meeting, Brian?
I don't think you need to. Oh.
Brian Malish has his hand up.
He does?
He does. I don't know if you realize it.
You mean on the thing or on the video?
I think I just forgot to lower it.
Okay. So while I respect what Jason is saying, I think it's been pretty clear with the commission members, the 75-25 is what they want to keep it at and where we've been. But I appreciate what you're saying, Jason, and that we should consider it. I think that the board, or not the board, but the commission members have considered it, and it appears that they're pretty stuck at the 75-25. Chris Thomas raised his hand.
I guess I'd question how much flexibility we have. So if we say 75-25, how far low can we go in that? Can we go all the way down to 70 when we're thinking of this? Or, is it a % or two? I mean, I'm worried if we go 70-30, does that leak all the way down to 65 or 60 or something like that at some point? So I guess that was my reasoning behind 75-25. And I guess maybe I'd want, to ask other commission members, what do you feel that flexibility is? Like what % is that?
I think that's a fair question, Chris. My comment is exactly what you're thinking. If we're at 75 and we've got to go down to 73 or 72, I think what Jason is saying is that from a perception outside the community, if we were to lower it, that would give us a little bit better perception out there as far as being more inclusive. Jason, I don't want to speak for you, but I think that's what you're saying, yes? In essence? Okay. I got one of these. So I'm going to go with that. That means, yeah, that's what he meant. So other commission members, any other comments about that? Brian Wallace?
To that comment, that, and Chris's point there, I think, each plan commission member, is going to have their own assessment of what they think that is. And I think, having a target number that is flexible and or a ratio that is flexible and we can move off of, I look at it myself, I might say, that's plus or minus 5%, whatever, as long as we're in that range, and each project's going to stand on some merit, and, one project may drive you lower and the next project may bring you back towards that ratio. That's where I land, but somebody else might be a little more tight on what they think that ratio and the variance should be. My concern is if we lower it too much, and somebody thinks that we can get down to 60%, that's a huge, 60-40 is a huge swing from where we're at. So that's why I land there. And I understand where Jason's coming from a perception perspective, but I think having the flexibility to move along those lines and not always be regimented at 75-25 gives us some of that flexibility to move on that line a little bit.
Brian Malich?
Yeah, I guess I want to go back to that 75-25. My role, similarly, I kind of work in the ±5 range. So seeing the 70% in my mind, that's kind of the warning sign for the floor. I'm not interested in going below kind of the 70 percent. So sticking with the 75 ±5 on each side is more of a range that I'm comfortable with.
Okay, Kristen Runge?
Yeah, my thinking aligns more with Jason's, and personally, I'll be pushing more towards the 70-30. So whether we think of that as a plus or minus the 75-25, or we just say 70-30 is the goal, and that's what we're sticking with, or to a certain extent, a horse apiece. It does communicate something to the outside world, though. But I'm willing to compromise on it.
Phil?
The 70-30 is fine with me also. I think it gives us more flexibility and a better.
Thanks. Brad Zeman?
No comment.
No comment? Is that what I heard?
Yep.
Okay. Okay. So, yeah, I guess I would be open to going to the 70, but then that's going to leave us, I don't think, with much flexibility. I mean, if we said 70 as the floor, that would be easier for me to accept, I guess, within that. But I would not, if we just set it at 70 and all of a sudden we have 65% we're at, that does, 65-35 is very different than 75-25, very, very different. So I want to make sure that they have guidance as they're writing this up for us right now. So we kind of have to come to a consensus on this one. So if they write that for next time. So what I'm hearing is the majority of you want to stay at 75. If that is indeed where your stance is, please raise your hand. Brian, Chris, Brad Zeman. Okay, so Phil and Kristen, looks like you guys are more on the 70 side of things. So, okay, so we've got two board members, village board members, who will be voting on this in the future anyway. So it sounds like 75 is where we're going to put the wording at right now. And then, Brian, you're going to come back with wordsmithing for next time. Work with staff to get that for us for our October meeting, correct?
Yeah, we will come back with Jason, and Kevin and I will work on language to address everything you raised to come back for October.
And I'll just ask one more time, do we need to table this then officially?
I don't think that you do, no. I mean, I think everybody understands that it's going to come back at the next meeting.
Okay. Is there any other comments then before we move on? Raise your hand. Kevin.
We will not have a public hearing at the next. I think we've gone through that part of the process. So we will just put this on for an action item.
Yeah, and keep in mind that when it does, then if we assume that this is going to go to the village board in November, there will be public hearings on both the amendment, zoning amendment, and the public hearing or the comp plan at the village board level.
However,
our new rules allow, right?
However, as always, I do encourage, if residents are watching this or see this, or Roberta, I think I saw Roberta was in this. If something comes in the paper and you want to make a comment, please make sure you email any of your commission members with comments that you might have. Okay, moving on. Update on Waunakee Westport Joint Plan Commission. Kevin?
It's canceled.
Okay. Then we need one more motion. Who would like to make
adjourn?
Kristen Runge, motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second by Chris Thomas. Any other comments? Our happiest person on this whole event tonight, the entire time, Tracy, please make the roll call vote, please.
Chris Zellner.
Yes.
Phil Willems.
Yes.
Kristen Runke.
Yes.
Brad Zeman.
Yes.
Brian Malish.
Yes.
Chris Thomas.
Yes.
And Brian Wallace.
Yes.
Motion carried. Meeting adjourned.
Thanks, everyone. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Night, everyone.